Morning.
Good morning, everyone.
The recording?
Recording has started.
Thank you, and welcome again to the day 2 of the 7th annual EPRIIEA Challenges in Energy Decarbonization Expert Workshop. My name is David Hunter, and I'm a Senior Advisor at EPRI. Very happy to be working with my colleagues at the IEA in co-hosting this event. Let's see, we had a fantastic discussion yesterday. We heard about all sorts of new innovations in distributed resources, from buildings to batteries to EVs and new ways to aggregate and manage them. One of the things that made that discussion so great was your participation, the participation from all of you. We have more than 500 registrants for this event from every continent except Antarctica, and it is your expertise, your viewpoints, your diversity of views, which you all contributed yesterday in the chat that helped make yesterday such a great success. Today we will be hearing about all those technologies that we heard about yesterday, but we will be hearing from the regulators and policymakers about how they are using those technologies, how they will be using those technologies in their plans to decarbonize, and what challenges and opportunities they're coming with along the way. So again, please do make use of the chat for both our speakers and our participants. Ask your questions, put in comments, suggestions, etc. And also, please go ahead and take a moment now to introduce yourself using the chat function. So your name, your company, your position, and where you're from. We want to know who's here, and we want to hear from you. It is now my pleasure to turn to our panel today and introduce the IEA's Chief Economist, Laszlo Varró. Laszlo succeeded Fatih Birol as Chief Economist in 2016, and he is no stranger, in fact, to this workshop. He was, in fact, previously, in his previous position at the IEA, he was the head of the Gas, Coal, and Power Markets Division, which is the group that we were working with when we founded this workshop. So it was founded under, in part at any rate, under Laszlo's leadership. So, Laszlo, over to you.
Thank you very much, David, for the kind introduction, and thank you very much for all the panel participants and all these industry participants joining for our discussion today. In addition to my personal note, I started my energy career as an electricity regulator. So this topic is very close to my heart, but I also have to say that I was an electricity regulator from 2000 to 2005, not so long ago, but at that time, the job of electricity regulation was still pretty much straightforward. Because that was the time, not so long ago, when they all believed that 1.5% annual demand growth is just God's will, and it's just baked in for all the regulatory decisions. Then you had to count the wires, you had to count the transformer stations, you had to come up with some regulatory asset base, apply some reasonable depreciation, apply some reasonable cost of capital, and then allocate those to various consumers. Electricity was flowing from the large power plants to the consumers. They did have demand response. In fact, even in communist Eastern Europe, I grew up in a flat which had centrally controlled hot water boilers, but they were reasonably straightforward. The fast forward today, we are facing electricity systems where the demand might be stagnating, or it might be declining. We might have significant new demand emerging from electric cars, but that's a fundamentally different demand source. We have a proliferation of rooftop solar. We have advanced digital technology applied, unlocking potential new flexibility sources into the power system. But I also have to say, as a former regulator, that I have a bit of a bad feeling that we regularly engage and we regularly have discussions with some very, very creative new flexibility companies, digital smart energy companies, aggregators, and so on. And with striking frequency, when I had a conversation with them, and they described the aggregation model that they have in mind, and I told them that, well, this is really creative, but how do you actually make money out of this? And with a surprising frequency, they actually acknowledged to me that no, we don't actually make money. We have some patient venture capital investors, and we hope that eventually the regulatory environment will be modernized. So as a former regulator, I feel that my community, the regulators community, have a job to do. There is a serious risk that the regulatory environment might be lagging behind these technology changes in the electricity sector. There is a serious risk that the regulatory environment, in terms of its legal structures and approaches, might still be geared towards this bygone golden age of centralized electricity systems with flexibility provided by gas turbines. And that can create trouble. And that can prevent the new technologies from fulfilling their mission and achieving their potential. And I see that as a considerable risk because when we run the numbers for what does it actually take to put the energy system on a low carbon trajectory in our sustainable development scenario, it wouldn't surprise you that we have very high levels of electrification and a very high reliance of variable renewables in the power generation part. Consequently, the annual average electricity network investment need increases by over $100 billion a year. Now, this is going to be extremely challenging from a social acceptance point of view. I simply don't believe that it's politically possible to build a co-operated electricity system for the type of electrified high renewable system we want to do. So we have to make sure that we across every single bit of flexibility, we have to optimize the physical capacity that we have, and that will require regulatory environments which enable the technology to fly. Now, we are very, very lucky to have some of the most forward-looking, some of the most innovative regulatory regimes represented in the panel. So without any further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Andrew McAllister from the California Energy Commission to share his perspectives with us.
Well, great. Thank you, Laszlo. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, David and Laszlo both, and EPRIIEA and IEA. It's really a pleasure to be here. I do not have slides. I wanted to leave as much time as possible for the Q&A and the discussion, because I think often in these areas of innovation, it's really nice to have that real-time interaction and build on each other. But I do have some key points that I'd like to make from the California perspective, and I think we have a fair amount of leadership in this area, obviously, and therefore a bit of gravitas, but also some very recent experience. You know, we're a large market. Just California is the 5th largest economy in the world. And between us and the other states around the western U.S., I think we get up into the 4th position maybe, but it's a large power market is the point. And I think the trends that we're seeing in the western U.S., and particularly the CAISO, or the California Independent System Operator Balancing Authority area, are instructive, actually, at this point. And they illustrate the impacts of climate change and the challenges of grid planning at all levels, from the wholesale markets, transmission systems, all the way down to the individual customer or distribution level, even down to the individual device. And so those are the sorts of things I want to touch on briefly here. So a little tiny bit of background. We are being successful in decarbonizing our economy. Our GDP since 2000 has gone up about roughly 60%. You know, we'll see what 2020 comes out to be with the contraction that we're seeing across the globe, but you know, our economic growth has been robust over the last 2 decades. Our population has grown somewhat over that period as well, about maybe 10 or 15%. Our overall greenhouse gas emissions are down about 10%, and that means that our emissions per capita, and particularly our emissions per unit of GDP, are way down. GHG emissions per unit of GDP per dollar is down about half since 2000. And partly that's because California's economy is already relatively energy efficient. Our per capita electricity consumption, for example, has been flat since the mid-1970s, in contrast to the rest of the country where it's continued to rise until the last 7 years. We also have a project which I won't go into the details of, but to decarbonize our grid overall. So Senate Bill 100 is our driving legislation there, and that has us decarbonizing, getting to 100% zero carbon resources in our grid by 2045. So that is happening. Our grid is decarbonizing. Overall, we can see year to year that, year to year, month to month, the carbon content of our grid is declining, and we are achieving our SB 100 goals. We're early in that. We've had a renewable portfolio standard for many years, and now the SB 100, the overall decarbonization goal of the grid is now, the 100% goal is relatively recent, but we are on track to do that. And certainly getting to the 80% or so is very, very doable with current technology. And the challenges are going to come beyond that when we really have to get that last little bit. We have to squeeze the last bits of carbon out of the grid. So there we're looking at other technologies like sequestration, like hydrogen, et cetera, which many of you across the world are as well. So the overall kind of decarbonization picture is I think, a positive one. We're about 60% zero carbon resources already in California, and our renewable, technically what qualifies as renewable, we're in the 30% range. So we're making great progress there. Challenges are that as you move towards intermittent renewable resources, depending on nature and the rhythms of nature to supply your grid, you really have to, as Laszlo was implying there, you really have to develop a grid that can be flexible at all levels. So what we're seeing now, and you probably may have seen the news in California in August and September, we had a couple of tremendous heat waves across the western U.S. And that presented stresses for the grid. And what we're seeing is we have this curve called the duck curve, which many of you might be familiar with, which basically is it demonstrates these amazing ramps in the morning and particularly the evening hours when the sun goes down and demand is ramping up. Net demand is ramping up, and it's that net demand that I think is presenting the greatest challenges. The system peak is in the mid-afternoon. The system consumption peak is in the mid-afternoon, in the 3, 4, 5 p.m., 4 p.m. range. But what's really important now is the net peak, and that's in the evening. As the sun goes down, it gets dark. We have similar levels of demand, a little bit less, but we also have this tremendous shift in supply. And so we're wrestling with the planning that goes behind making sure that we have resource adequacy, sufficient resources available in that hour, that 1, 2, 3 hour period in the evening as we both import renewables from across the West and we figure out how to optimally use our gas-fired fleet and bring new non-carbon resources on to supply those resources. And so that's the challenge, is that we have a brief period where we have a tremendous shift in the supply resource. Okay, so what does that mean? That really means that we have to create new tools. And so we're very much focused, and I have two punchlines here. The first punchline is that the distribution grid is key for decarbonization and cost management. So flexibility at the distribution level, it's not really an option to build all the transmission lines in the world and just be interconnected across the whole West. It's very difficult to build transmission in California and many other places. But we also have this existing distribution grid and plenty of technologies that can help us have flexible loads, marshal our distributed energy resources in the local level, deal with capacity constraints and congestion right where it's happening. And that is the most efficient way, given the technologies that we have today in 2020, moving into 2021. As the economy digitizes, it brings all sorts of great tools to into our toolbox to be able to manage load. So I'll just mention a few of those tools. We're developing load management standards, so that's a regulatory approach to kind of forced the issue of having time-based tariffs, even location-based pricing, and the platforms that will enable some automation behind transmission of those pricing signals. So that's a very exciting initiative that I'm leading at the Energy Commission. We also have legislation to implement requirements for flexibility for the capacity for our appliances. So that's refrigerators and pool pumps and possibly EV chargers for flexible loads to really have that control, that communications and control capability that allows it to aggregate those resources and provide them even up into the wholesale markets. And so we'll be developing regulations that make sure that those capabilities, the load flexibility capabilities of devices, of end-use devices, actually are done in a way that is standardized and aggregatable. And then we also have a bunch of programs in the building code and other forums to encourage load flexibility across the board. So the second punchline, and with this I'll wrap up, is that the future really is flexible, and it's obviously related, but aggregated load flexibility works. When we had these challenges in August and then in September, it could have been much worse, actually. We did have some outages in parts of the state, but active efficiency and load flexibility, aggregated load flexibility, proves to be callable, aggregatable, and biddable into the wholesale market in a way that was detectable. It actually helped keep the lights on. And if we'd been doing, this sorts of things a few years ago, then maybe we would have not been having the conversation about outages. But automated communication and control will enable cost-effective load shifting. And so part of what I'd like to talk about in the Q&A is that, how do we enable demand flexibility? The data ecosystem, those issues, bringing the sector into the resource adequacy framework as a capacity resource that's actually usable in markets at scale is really the challenge ahead of us. And so that's what we're trying to do in California, and that's what I'd like to talk about here today and going forward. So thank you for the opportunity to present, and looking forward to hearing the others.
Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, so thank you very much, Commissioner. So, let me remind the audience that on the upper right corner of the screen, you should see a polling set of questions of what is the biggest barrier of scaling up efficient distributed resource deployment. You still have some time to vote, and we would be very much interested in your vote. Now, let me pass the floor to Challengesin from the Norwegian Regulatory Authority for Energy. Norway is also a very unique example because at the national level, for decades, Norway has close to 100% hydropower, which is, of course, a very nicely flexible low carbon resource. But Norway is also a taste of things to come. It is a country which really was front-running electric car deployment at an extremely high penetration rate. And also anybody who has visited Norway is very impressed by the unique geography. It's a very long country with a very complex continuous geography. And I will be very interested to hear the insights of how Norway is managing this unique set of challenges. So, Mr. Rubero, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Laszlo. Thank you for inviting me. I've been invited to talk about a recently proposed tariff scheme change. We have been working with the last couple of years here in Norway. Our goal with this change is to, in a larger degree, incentivize the customer to be more flexible and to, over time, reduce their peak load demand. So that this hopefully, in the end, would, in the long term, will contribute to postpone grid investments and lower costs for the consumers, but also facilitate flexibility in future flexibility markets. You mentioned some of of the facts in the Norwegian system already. We have all renewable production with 94% installed capacity power. And furthermore, electricity covers all household energy needs. So we use a lot of energy for indoor heating, hot water, cooking, lighting, and appliances. So a normal household in Norway use approximately 16 to 20,000 kilowatt hours per year. And therefore we have a quite robust grid, and we are in a good position to handle a new increase in demand. And that's some of the backdrop for our change in the tariff scheme is that even though we use a lot of electricity for as an energy source, we still use a lot of fossil energy as well. So, and this is mostly for industrial purposes and for transportation. And the most efficient way for these customers to decarbonize, to reduce their carbon footprint, is to switch from fossil energy sources to electricity. And this transition has started already. For example, 50% of all new cars sold in Norway are electric cars. And this is also, it's not a challenge, but the biggest challenge and also the biggest opportunity for flexibility in the distribution grid. Yes, and the other part why we changed or are suggesting to change the tariff scheme is that new technologies makes it easier for a customer to be more active. They can, for example, produce their own energy and offer flexibility. So if you go to the next slide, please. So back to tariffs. Besides to cover the network company's costs, the tariffs should be cost reflective and contribute to an efficient use of and development of the grid. Today, the Norwegian tariff structure is volumetric. And the volumetric part makes up of an average of 70% of the tariff cost, the total cost. While the network company's cost structure is the other way around. 70 to 80% are fixed costs, at least in the long or medium long term. So to give the right signals to decentralized production or flexibility, it's important that the tariffs convey the right information. So if you go to the next slide, please. To get more cost-reflective tariffs than the volumetric tariffs we have today, we have suggested to reduce the volumetric part, but at the same time make it possible to vary prices throughout the day, a kind of dynamic peak pricing or time-of-use pricing. When you reduce some part of the tariff, another part will increase. So due to so the network company will cover their costs, and then the remaining fixed part will increase. But we have suggested that this part shall be differentiated based on the customer's load demand. We think this will give the customers the incentives to move demand in the short term, within a day, typically, for example, by charging their electric cars smart during off-peak hours, typically during the night. And in the long term or medium long term, reduce their total load demand. This would typically be for a year or longer. This could be done by insulating their homes better. The winter is cold in Norway, so we use a lot of energy for heating. So if you reduce the need for heating, you reduce your total energy demand and load, typically the load demand as well. even though we have suggested a more dynamic tariff scheme, which incentivizes flexibility, we don't think tariffs are suitable for managing congestions and immediate flexibility needs. We think market mechanisms would be better suited and more targeted instrument for this. And I guess this would be elaborated more in some of the later presentations. So that was our story, our suggestion for a new tariff scheme. I look to hear the other participants. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. So now we move back to the other side of the Atlantic, to New York, which I consider to be a fascinating case study, because New York also has a very ambitious decarbonization ambition. It has, at least some parts of the state, extremely high population density, overlaid on some of the oldest electricity networks in the world. And in the meantime, with the increasing electrification of heat, it is likely that it will face a Norwegian-style winter peak demand as well in the future. And I also watched with great interest the very innovative initiatives by the state of New York to create new regulatory solutions for distributed resources. But I'm very keen to learn more from David Sandbeck, the Vice President of Distributed Energy Resources. So, Mr. Sandbeck, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you could all hear me clearly. It's really fun to bounce around from Brazil to California, Norway, back to New York. Kudos to WebEx. This is a lot of fun, and thanks for having me. Again, my name is David Sandbank. I'm the Vice President of Distributed Energy Resources at NYSERDA. NYSERDA is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. We are the clean energy implementer for New York State. We are funded by ratepayers, and we use that money to implement and create and implement clean energy programs within the state of New York. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to do is start on a very high level, because this is very important as far as what New York's done, which is a very, very big milestone for us, and I think the country as a whole. What started out as the Green New Deal turned into what we call the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is essentially a law. So our goals now, our energy and carbon goals, are codified into law with time parameters embedded into the law. So not only are these goals, these are mandatory, these are mandates of which we have to achieve by a certain time. Some of the high-level areas are greenhouse gas reductions. We have to be 40% reduced by 2030 and 85% reduced by 2050. One of the key components here, especially for this session, dealing with distributed energy resources, is our utility grid has to be 70% renewable by 2030 and 100% zero carbon by 2040. So as you can see, these are big goals for us, and something that Governor Cuomo has really stepped up and been a great leader in our clean energy initiatives and carbon reduction goals. Next slide, please. So one of the goals in the CLCPA is 6 gigawatts of solar, distributed solar. That is run through the New York Sun program, overseen by NYSERDA. And there's also another goal of 3 gigawatts by 2025 of energy storage. So those particular two technologies are integral in our distributed energy resources. which are off to a very, very fast start. We have a lot of deployment right now, a lot of attention being played to those technologies within the distributed platform. And one way in which New York State has really changed the way in which we value these distributed energy resources is in order to, when we have these large goals, we really need to move away from a blunt mechanism in what we call net energy metering. We can't do net metering when we're putting 6 gigawatts of solar, distributed solar on the grid. We have to really do it in a smart way that makes the grid more efficient and saves ratepayer money and the price signals to the best of our abilities for time and location. And it's been, I think, extremely effective to this point. I'm not going to read each individual portion of what we call the value stack, which are the price signals for distributed energy resources. But, you know, I think to summarize, what we're seeing now is a lot of storage paired with solar, a lot of solar projects that are doing single access trackers to provide more kWh power later in the day when the grid needs it the most, and they're going to be rewarded for that. So we're sending price signals. It's changing the way these products are deployed, both temporally and locationally, and it's been very successful to this point. So New York State has sort of stepped up in massive deployment of distributed energy resources by providing those projects with the price signals to be bankable and have mass deployment. Next slide, please. Okay, this is sort of the big question of this panel, and I had to do some thinking about this. So how do we build reliable and resilient decentralized energy system? And I think, you know, a part of what we've been doing lately and what we keep saying is it's pretty simple in its concept, complicated in its implementation. DERs need to be invited to the party and recognized in order for this to work. And we'll get into that in the following points below. But when you're talking about energy storage, solar, and flexible loads on the distribution network, they are physical assets that are similar to what is used in planning centralized networks. They're just a different location and scale. So they need to be recognized. So in order for them to be recognized, you need deployment of those so that they exist. I talked about that earlier with our goals of New York Sun and energy storage and how VETR, as it's known, it compensates those projects. So we have mass deployment of distributed energy resources. So what's next? How do they become recognized? How do they become invited to the party? And, you know, right now they're passive assets, meaning they're on the distribution network. They are providing benefits, but they're not recognized. So we need the distributed energy resources to be in the system models to begin with, both from a utility and bulk level, bulk levels. We, like California, have our own independent system operator, the NYSO, and they control the real-time energy market. And the utilities have their own way of doing their planning process. If they can combine and allow DERs to participate and include them in the planning, we feel like the grid and, the NYSO would be a more efficient process. On the second point, including DERs and energy reliability and planning, you know, utilities and NYSO need to work together to recognize the potential of DERs that in sending the right signals to optimize the grid. Even though VETR is giving them the price signals, what good are those price signals if they're not recognized by those who map out what is needed and what isn't needed on a minute by minute basis? And on the third point, with requiring integrated transmission and distribution planning and broader operational protocols, I think we're trying to get to this answer of how do we balance a centralized grid with a decentralized grid. And the bottom line is they have to work together. It just can't be one or the other. We have really good parts of big centralized plants. We have 9 gigawatt goal of offshore wind down by New York City and Long Island. Those have great economy of scale, and they're very important and vital to our energy mix. But we have to also recognize distributed energy resources because they have a lot of strengths too. Places where DERs work better is in congested areas. They provide a lot of resilience. Non-wires projects, you really need both, but you need to recognize the potential of both and have them work together in the same planning level playing field. Utilize both of them in your software modeling and planning as well. So next slide, please. So New York is moving forwards very aggressively. We have the value stack, which I call it, which is VETR, which is deploying these distributed energy resources. We have New York Sun with the deployment and goal of 6 gigawatts of solar by 2025. We have 3 gigawatts of storage by 2025. In those goals, and we have a couple working groups and implementation plans that are happening right now, and that basically is a distributed system implementation plan and also a market design and integration working group, which is trying to figure out how to integrate DERs into the whole system. That's it, and my time is up, but I will say that New York, not many people know this, is where solar was invented and where the first rooftop project was deployed in 1884. So fascinating, and we as New Yorkers hope to lead the new revolution in distributed energy resources. It's been far too long since 1884 until now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Of course, New York was also the first place when Edison built his very first public power plants. So the region has a long-standing pioneering role. But now we are going back to Europe, and there we have to keep in mind that all this discussion on distributed energy resources is not taking place in systems where we cut the wire and move to an isolated microgrid. These fascinating changes at the distribution level unfold as part of an interconnected system, where transmission system operators are still responsible for maintaining frequency control and overall system balance. They still have legal responsibilities to keep the lights on. And also, they manage long-distance transmission flows, which are going to be also extremely important in the context of offshore wind developments and large-scale utility-scale solar plants as well. So with that in mind, I very much welcome Mr. Victor Charbonnier from the European Transmission System Operators perspective from ENTSO-E. Mr. Charbonnier.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I should say both good morning and good afternoon since this is a transatlantic event. So ENTSO-E is the association of the 42 European electricity TSOs that was established 10 years ago by European regulation to really support the development of a European electricity market. And as part of that organization, I'm focusing more on the coordination between TSOs and the distribution system operators. So that's what I would like to bring on the table today. Next slide, please. I think I should start with one thing we do in ENTSO-E, which is a 10-year network development plan for transmission system, and we develop for that scenarios that are looking at how we can make also Europe a carbon neutral continent. We have developed two scenarios, one that is more like the centralized approach, it's called Global Ambition, where we foresee a penetration of renewables in primary energy up to 69%, and we have a decentralized approach, which is like distributed energy scenarios, where it's up to 82%. So whatever these levels, it's really strong challenges on the grids. Really, we have increasing rapid needs. That's what you see on the left-hand side of the slide. We'll have more frequent and larger frequency deviation. We'll have more congestions. We have less inertia, low level of short circuit power, etc. And today, really, thermal capacities are providing bulk of ancillary services to TSOs, and they're not going to be around in the next decades because of national policy phase out, because of economic viability issues, because they also reach the end of their operational lifetime. But the good news, and that's on the right-hand side of the slide, is that really we see a strong potential for demand-side technologies to enter the market. Maybe their contribution in terms of energy won't be that sufficient, but at least they will reduce our dependence to carbon-intensive peaking units. If in our distributed energy scenario, we assume that we could see up to 120 million of electric vehicles already by 2030 and 43 million of heat pumps. That's rather in line with some of third-party scenarios. And assuming like that you could use only 10% of the flexibility, you could have up to 100 gigawatts of regulating power. That's up to almost 10% of the installed generation fleet in Europe. So it's huge potential that is out there, and we should make sure we manage to integrate these resources. Next slide, please. And one key element for integrating these resources is really the cooperation between TSOs and DSOs. We're going to move to a world where like half of renewables, up to maybe 70% of renewables will be connected to distribution level. TSOs will be increasingly reliant on resources connected at that layer, and the DSOs will also face new challenges themselves. So we should avoid at all costs a competition between system operators to accessing these resources and put in place the coordination to make sure that there's no harmful interaction whenever one activates the resource connected at the other. We also make sure that the market parties can value the flexibility in any markets they want, to make sure we use the flexibility where and when it is the most needed. So, and this for all the use cases you see in the middle of the slide. So for balancing, I think it's quite well covered in the open regulation on terms of coordination between operators, and we can already observe in many countries significant share of DER participation in reserve markets, up to 40% in some countries. So it's really satisfactory, I would say, and has led to a reduction of the balancing cost. Congestion management is a new topic picking up interest because there's an increasing need, at least on the TSO side, for resources. That has raised fundamental questions on market design, like the design configuration and so on, that I will skip today. But we also thought of how we can make our dispatch process more efficient. And we're looking more and more towards that market-based type of approach, flexibility markets. DSOs are looking at that too. And it's important we align our processes with DSOs processes because distribution constraints tend to have an increasing impact on what's happening on transmission constraints. For voltage, stability, inertia here, I won't expand too much. It's maybe these areas where our dependence on synchronous generators is the highest today. And we really need to scratch our head on how we're going to manage the decommissioning of these assets and substitute to that. It's likely to be a mix of embedded grid technical solutions, like with forming converters, such things, and also like market-based solutions coming from the system users. So we really need to have a collective dialogue with DSOs, but also manufacturers of equipment and system users to define the technical requirements and are we going to procure new ancillary services from these resources. Next slide, please. I mentioned congestion management. We have elaborated actually a report with the 4 European DSO associations, find the name at the bottom of the slide, on how you could organize the market-based procurement of congestion management services from distributed energy resources. The idea was that there's a lot of developments in different European countries, and we felt that might be a risk of market fragmentation of really heterogeneous developments. So we thought it'd be good to have some golden rules, so to speak. Of course, I talk a lot about market-based solutions, but there's also many aspects related to active system management, like tariff solutions, flexible connection contracts, like grid topology measures, etc. But those are not addressed in these reports. And some of the key rules I won't expand on the very each step of the process, but like some of the golden rules we have that we should really strive to align our views on system needs, try to maybe standardize congestion management products, because that's really a key element to support the liquidity of these markets. We should simplify the procedures for market assets to enter these markets, make sure like the pre-qualification processes are streamlined. We should avoid pushing congestions in each other's grids. So that means we really need to coordinate the green impact assessments whenever we activate resources. And we should also avoid lock-in effects. So we should, for instance, make sure that these grid security analyses I just mentioned are done on a dynamic basis, maybe as close as possible to real time, instead of having really ex ante rules that can be a bit too limited, too restrictive. We should avoid a gatekeeper approach, let's say, like a cascading approach whereby it's local first and system last. So for that, we have elaborated different market models where you can have like maybe separated distribution congestion management market, or you can pull them transmission distribution congestion management market, or you can have maybe a full co-optimization of balancing congestion management. But whatever the model, we should make sure that information flow, and that's the purpose of that box you see in the middle, like flexibility register. That's one of the primary tools that we see developing that can really support that exchange of information. Can be very basic static information about the location and the capabilities of the assets, but could also support the exchange of information related to the bids, to the settlement. And next and last slide. So the ASM is really about the theory, but it's interesting to see that the concepts it advanced are being tested in many places. There's still some like big design controversies that maybe we can skip and bring maybe to the Q&A. What we see is that the common trends are that these projects mainly look at congestion management and balancing as use cases. Also, a long-term availability contract for network investment deferral. But we also see that most of them are still at are innovation trials, and there's only very few commercially active projects. And when they are, they're really geographically concentrated in the UK, in the Nordics. We also see that power exchanges are becoming increasingly active in that space, which raises question a bit on the frontier between commercial and regulated domain. So there's really open questions on the scalability of these different models and how we can bring the lessons from these projects into the regulation. I think it's also great to have a workshop like this to compare these approaches with what's going on also in other places in the world, notably in the US. I'll leave it there and happy to answer any questions in the Q&A.
Thank you very much. And now we are crossing back to the Atlantic, to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which has done a very impressive and innovative rulemaking recently to improve the market access of distributed resources. And we are going to have Mr. Jigar Shakadani, the Director of the Office of Energy Policy and Innovation from FERC, to share the experience with us.
Hello, thank you very much. Yes, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. First, I want to thank EPRIIEA and IEA for the invitation to participate today. Second, I have to provide my standard disclaimer that the views I express today do not necessarily represent the views of the Commission or any of the commissioners. As Laszlo introduced me, my name is Jigar Shakadani. I'm the Director of the Policy Office of the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. For the purposes of today's discussion, I will note that the Commission is an independent regulatory agency that regulates the sale of wholesale energy and the interstate transmission of electricity. We have jurisdiction over other areas, but for today's discussion, that's what I'm focusing on. For the folks that are not as familiar with FERC, the Commission does not regulate local distribution of electric energy sales or sales to end users. One of the key roles of our office is identifying emerging energy policy issues and recommending to the chairman and the commission potential actions to address or advance that issue. We've heard this morning about a range of issues that are ongoing, the need for flexibility, the need for acknowledging that there are a range of resources that can meet the load needs, and we've been working on many of those issues. Early in its existence, our office was tasked with very specific goals, including increasing demand response participation in the markets, removing barriers for new technologies, and increasing access for renewable resources to the transmission grid. I would say our mission has evolved, but we still look for opportunities to advance energy policy to ensure there is adequate investment in the energy industry for sustainable and reliable service at a reasonable cost to ratepayers. As many of you might have heard our chairman, he is very excited and very supportive of cost-effective new technologies and the ability for those technologies to participate in a level playing field in the wholesale markets. In that vein, I will just discuss the recent Commission action. Last month, the Commission issued Order 2222, which is an effort to allow the participation of distributed energy resource aggregations in markets operated by regional transmission organizations and independent system operators, or I'll refer to them as regional operators for the rest of my discussion. So background, so prior to 2016, my staff had been monitoring the increase in distributed energy resources and observing the value that these resources were providing to the distribution grid. We also reviewed the developments in states like California that Commissioner McAllister mentioned and that David mentioned about New York's work on these areas. In 2016, we issued a proposed rule that addressed both electric storage resources and distributed energy resource aggregations. In 2018, we finalized a rule on the storage participation in wholesale markets and realized that we needed to do a little bit more work on the distributed energy resources participation, issues such as identifying interconnection issues related with distributed energy resources, coordination of distributed energy resource participation in both the wholesale and the retail programs, and coordination amongst the different entities to ensure safe and reliable operations. This September, Order 2222 was finalized. Its goal is to remove barriers to the participation of distributed energy resources in the, to be clear, aggregation of distributed energy resources in the markets operated by the regional operators. This is in order to enhance competition and in turn help ensure that these markets produce just and reasonable rates. Some of the benefits of this rulemaking included increasing the participation of these resources, including lowering costs for consumers through enhanced competition, more grid flexibility and resilience, and more innovation within the electric power industry. Briefly, a distributed energy resource, as we've defined it, is any resource located on the distribution system, any subsystem thereof, or behind a customer meter. Examples of such resources include electric storage resources, electric vehicles, among others. A few points I want to emphasize. I will note that this rule was built on the Commission's past efforts on the storage rule. Again, the storage rule was focused on reducing barriers once storage became a cost-effective technology to participate in wholesale markets. Also, an earlier order the Commission issued was on demand response aggregations and allowing aggregations to participate in wholesale markets. Using that background fed into our development of the DER aggregation rule. Another important point, the entity that's participating in the wholesale markets is the DER aggregator. That is the entity that's jurisdictional to the Commission. As other speakers have noted, there will need to be ongoing coordination between the wholesale and the retail markets, as well as the system operations. So part of the rule is requiring coordination between the regional operator, the DER aggregator, the distribution utility, and the state and the regulatory authority to address the concerns about the safety and the reliability of operations and avoid double counting. Just for everyone's knowledge, right now, we issued that rule, as I mentioned, September. Entities that had questions or concerns about that rule currently have filed rehearing, which is a form of appeal before us, to ask questions about some of our calls in that rule. We are looking at that, and subsequently the regional operators will have to file compliance filings complying with our rule, and those are likely due mid-next year. So with that, finally to close, I will note that over the years, the Policy Office has led and participated in multiple efforts to meet the needs of the changing energy landscape, from improving energy market price formation to examining barriers to resources like hybrid resources. We just had a conference on that, among other things. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to address any questions and look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kadani. And now we are returning to the work of the network operators and to the topic of the cooperation of DSOs in a centralized system. And the next speaker is Rudolf Razier, the Head of Innovation Department of the Energy Network Administration of the United Kingdom, which is a country with perhaps the best case study of the interplay between distributed systems and very large utility-scale offshore wind developments, and also a strongly pro-nuclear, as government in the United Kingdom is one of the few advanced market economies where the government is promoting new nuclear development. So it is going to be a decentralized system with some very important large-scale developments as well. And how this fascinating interplay will be managed, we are going to hear from Mr. Adam Fazier. Thank you.
Thank you, Laszlo. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you, and thanks to the IEA and EPRIIEA for having me here today. So as Laszlo indicated, I'm going to talk about the role of DSOs and flexibility in a decentralized future. So if we can move on to the first slide, please. So I work for a company called the Energy Networks Association. We represent the gas and electricity networks in the UK and Ireland. So in red there, you've got our electricity networks for transmission and distribution, and the equivalent on the gas network in yellow down the bottom. In the UK, we have what's called an unbundled system in line with EU law, which is where the networks are separate companies from the generators and the retailers in the majority of cases. And from a distribution perspective, we have over 30 gigawatts of distributed generation currently connected in the UK, and around 85% of that is renewable. It's mainly wind and solar. We also have an increasing uptake of other DER, especially EVs. I think this year we're at about 7% of new car sales are fully electric, so not quite at Norway's 50%, but I think this year we're at 70%, and it's rising quickly. Just to give you a bit of an idea of the overall mix of energy as well, I think in Q2 of this year we hit 44% renewable, which was a record for us. And then we, as Laszlo indicated, we've got around about 20% nuclear on top of that, and most of everything else is gas, a little bit of coal left as well. So if we move to the next slide, please. So in terms of the UK, we have ratified our Paris Agreement commitments. In 2019, we also became the first major economy to legislate net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And all of the subsequent policies to support that are why we have so many renewables connected. We've had renewable obligation certificates previously, then feed-in tariffs. Now we've got contracts for difference and a smart export guarantee, which have supported mass uptake of renewables. The government also has a dedicated smart grid policy, which is relatively unusual as well for most major economies. It's called the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan. However, it's good to have policy, but unless it's supported in the regulation, when it comes to monopoly networks, it's pretty useless if it's not supported in regulation. So our regulator, Ofgem, strongly supports these goals, and our regulatory model is something called the RIIO model. Stands for revenue equals incentives plus innovation plus outputs, as you can see on the screen there. But the key thing to note about our regulatory model, without going into too much detail, is that it's performance-based and it has a toe-tax element. What this means is that the networks are incentivized to deliver outputs or positive outcomes to customers, regardless of what the solution is they choose to achieve that. So regardless of whether it's procuring a service from a market or building more network. Whereas many other regulatory frameworks globally are around basically just networks, building more networks. We don't have that model. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So what are we doing at ENA to help roll out these positive parts of our regulation? We've set up something called the Open Networks Project. Effectively, this is a project that's looking to deliver the smart grid in the UK and Ireland. And what it's effectively doing is helping set up localized flexibility markets to help customers connect their DER and then provide services from that DER back to networks, whether it's nationally or locally, to help support the network. It's written directly into our government's policy, and we're very much taking a stakeholder-led approach on this. We want to bring the industry with us, not just design it as networks. So if we could move on, please. So more of the DER that we're connecting, more and more of that 30 gigawatts is becoming flexible, which is critical to achieving net zero, as we've already heard. So when we talk about flexibility, we effectively mean the ability to control and schedule demand or generation and turn it up and down to meet either local or national needs. All of our members last year made a flexibility commitment, which effectively means that they're testing the market for flexibility services ahead of building more network. So what that means is whenever we have a congestion, we will go to the market, say, who can provide a service to help us relieve that congestion? And if it is cheaper than what it would cost to build the network, we have committed to procuring that. And we're incentivized to do that under that TOTEX mechanism that I've talked about in the regulation. So what does this actually mean in numbers? As Victor indicated, this is no longer pilots, it's no longer innovation projects or R&D. This is now business as usual across all of the Great Britain DNOs, or distribution networks, of which there's 6 in Great Britain. So what it means in numbers is last year, 2019, we tendered out around about a gigawatt. So that's a gigawatt of congestion that we had on a postcode level that was tendered out to the market. That could have been, it's typically 33 kV or 11 kV. However, we do even have some LV markets, 400 volts here, 3-phase. And we procured, we contracted, so we signed contracts for around about 25 to 30% of that 1 gigawatt we put out to tender. And there's a number of reasons why we didn't get all of what we wanted, but ultimately these are new markets, they're local markets, and they're not that liquid. However, we are increasing the size of these markets. So this year, we're on track to tender out over 1.9 gigawatts, again, across those distribution networks in Great Britain. So this excludes any flexibility that the transmission operators are tendering for. This is just at the distribution level. We've got over 1.9 gigawatts tendered out this year, and we are expecting the amount that we contract from that to be increased. But ultimately, these are geographically constrained markets. If you're talking about LV, it could be one block of offices in central London, for example. So they are geographically constrained. There is a cap on the liquidity you can get. But what we're doing under the Open Networks project is trying to increase liquidity in these local markets. There's a range of things we're doing. We're focusing on standardization. So we've now created one flexibility contract for all of the country. We're focusing on transparency and reporting of data, and also just general dissemination, marketing, awareness of these markets. Because a lot of the times we tell people about them, they're a little skeptical, but as they talk to the networks and become a little bit more confident and understanding that these are enduring markets, they get more comfortable and end up signing contracts. So I think I'm pretty much out of time, but that's me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion with the rest of the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This presentation was actually a very good introduction for our discussions, because we already have dozens of questions coming into the chat function, and I would encourage you to write in your questions from the audience. But basically what we are going to do is that I'm going to cluster some of the questions, because several questions point in the same directions. And I would say that my first question would actually be the follow-up of the UK experience, is that we will need in the system, utilities and distributed resources working smoothly on an operational level, but also cooperating for optimal system planning. And the question is, which came up from several participants, is what considerations we need to include for regulations, and how do we need to change the regulatory incentives to achieve this smooth operational coordination and long-term planning. If there is a volunteer to go first, I'm happy to take it. Otherwise, we can take another round around the table.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my position is fairly clear that I think for this to properly work and for networks to be incentivized to use these flexibility services, you need an output performance-based regulatory mechanism along the lines of what we have in the UK. You have to have a TOTEX model somehow. It's not perfect. You know, we still need to tweak it. There's still potentially better incentives that can come about, but ultimately that is the type of model that you need to incentivize networks, at least networks, to use this flexibility going forward.
Mm-hmm.
But you also need, I should say, you also need incentives cross sectors. So you need it between transmission and distribution. You need to incentivize T to work with D and vice versa. There's no doubt about that.
Sure. May I invite the Norwegian regulator to reflect on this?
In Norway, we are working a lot with information systems between the DSO and the TSO, so that's part of things that have been mentioned earlier. It's important that the network companies can observe the flexibility so they know which flexibility resources to disconnect or use. They have to know if it actually the procured flexibility is active. In Norway, at least, we don't have these information systems in place all the way down on the distribution level. So that's part of something we are working on at the moment. Our information system between the distribution operators.
Okay, Commissioner Beckmeister, please.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in here as well. Great set of presentations, really complimentary, so thank you for that. So I wanted to just highlight a couple of things quickly that are related. The information management, the data ecosystem, the platforms for actually moving large quantities of data around from customer, even device level, up to aggregator, up to system, and giving visibility up and down that chain is really a prerequisite for making this kind of automation of aggregated load flexibility resources, or just flexibility resources generally. And I think we're making huge strides in California to do that. And it is a moment, I think, that we've realized that a muscular policy approach is really required. You have to tell the utilities, you have to tell the actors that, you have to give a platform that aggregators don't have to pay for all of in order to create, it's a public good. That platform is a public good. And so you really have to kind of force that issue with muscular regulation in order to enable the markets that we're all talking about functioning, whether it's through pricing or other kinds of programs to mobilize and organize these resources. The other thing I wanted to say is just, I agree with most of what's been said. I think Victor and Randolph certainly about the role of markets and all this and what they kind of do well and don't do. We have a vertically disintegrated system in California, and so passing the baton from the customer to the distribution utility to the wholesale markets is not a trivial thing to do. And so getting those incentives aligned across each of those fences to hand those off seamlessly is a challenge. Whereas I think if you have a vertically integrated system like much of Europe, then I think that becomes easier because you have an end-to-end system that actually is more naturally aligned. But we have in California, our peak load is roughly 45 to 50 gigawatts. We have 13 or so gigawatts of utility scale solar of different types, mostly PV. We have 10 gigawatts of rooftop solar behind the meter. And so that's a huge percentage of our overall installed capacity, which is in the 70 gigawatt range. And so dealing with the shift in the late afternoon requires mobilization of flexibility. I didn't mention storage, but others have. That's obviously a key flexibility resource as well. So the second point I wanted to make is just that the qualities of each of these there's a lot of flavors of flexibility. Batteries obviously has a lot of upside for ancillary services and frequency and voltage regulation. But thermal storage, different kinds of storage, load management, shifting, and load shaping, all of those have different qualities. And I think the challenge before us is to sort that out and organize markets that can value each of those characteristics. I think New York is making good strides there. But to unpack the actual services that are being provided and create clear markets for those services in a way that's much more articulated than we're historically kind of equipped or thinking about doing. So the FERC order will help that happen across the U.S. I think in California we're kind of a little bit ahead of that game, but I think there's a lot of work to be done that we can coordinate on.
Thank you, Raj. Ms. Galani, please.
Thank you very much. I was going to say, so I think one of the Commission's focus has been on removing barriers to different types of resources to participate in these markets. Given the jurisdictional scheme we have in the U.S., that has been the focus, and I think to agree with Commissioner McAllister, again, it is to the extent we can provide price signals to resources to make the investments, give them another platform to participate, that is important, and that's been our focus, letting the industry and the researchers pursue the innovation. So thank you.
Thank you. If no other comment, my next question would be that a number of you mentioned the rooftop solar. That's certainly a very, very important factor of the new energy systems. Now, I have to say that every time the discussion comes to net metering of residential solar, I am always reminded to the debate that I often have with my kids. Because I have two teenage kids, and if you are in that part of your life, you are probably worried that our kids are using the internet too much. Now, just imagine that your kid is telling you that, Daddy, I used the internet to download the new version of my favorite game, and I also uploaded a few videos of our dog on YouTube. It was 1 gigabyte downloaded and 1 gigabyte uploaded, that's zero, so I didn't use the internet at all. You would probably say that this is nonsense, right? But this nonsense is still a fundamental basis of electricity regulation in many jurisdictions, despite the fact that when you have a consumer who is using the grid to upload a megawatt hour of electricity in the summer and download a megawatt hour of electricity in the winter, that consumer is actually using the grid. He or she is using it both during the winter and also the summer. So I wonder, have we figured out what is the good way to pay for the electricity networks in societies with large penetration of rooftop solar? Do we have a standard template that we could recommend, or is this still a debate to be resolved? To take up this question.
This is David. I think I'd love to jump in at this point, if that's okay, because New York State is, I believe, out front on this. I did mention in my presentation about how we are compensating distributed energy resources through what we call a value stack, and we're doing our best there is market risk just like there is in the wholesale market with day-ahead LBMP and capacity, so that fluctuates like the general market, but we have an E value and a demand reduction value. that are looked at as a compensation of how these distributed energy resources can provide grid efficiency. So that's really important. So, if anyone wants to look at our website, you could just Google New York Sun value stack, and there's a slew of information there on where we're at with that. We had to straddle moving from net metering to the value stack by not making it so heavy on merchant risk, not making it so heavy on ratepayer risk, and locking in. So about 50% of it is flexible and the other 50% is locked in. So there is merchant risk in it, but we feel like we've sort of tried to balance the two together to encourage distributed energy resources to deploy in a way that's more beneficial to the grid and the ratepayer. And your metaphor reminds me when I was a kid and I used to steal my parents' car and not tell them about it, I would have to drive in reverse for a very long time so that if they looked at the odometer, I wouldn't get in trouble, and that's probably as silly as the upload and download.
Excellent. May I invite a reflection from California on this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So we have longstanding net metering. I think, that was back in the day, that was incredibly important to stimulate the PV market, to get that marketplace going. It is now mature. Costs have come down tremendously. I think there's a natural incentive for people. It's culturally mainstream now. And as I said, we have almost 10 gigawatts of rooftop solar in the state. And so there is an evolution to kind of dial back the benefits of net metering. There is concern, that it does have sort of a cross subsidy associated with it. There's a tremendous debate, as New York saw in its development of its current regime, that there's a lot of political sensitivity around this, and I think we can't ignore that. And when you have more than 1 million customers that have rooftop solar, behind the meter solar, that is a constituency that you don't just kind of dial back, at your leisure. And so that it's a complex terrain. But I do think, so where we're approaching it in California, and our Public Utilities Commission is going to do a net energy metering version 3.0 here in the next year or two. Where we're kind of ending up is that treating the customer, sort of what they do behind the meter is kind of up to them. And so self-consumption on site is something that I think we're looking to make the rate regime more compatible with. So you have an incentive to store it on site or to use it on site, do something with it, rather than push it out onto the grid where, you have these grid interaction sensitivities. And so the net compensation for energy that's pushed out across the meter will be decreasing, and the incentives to use energy on site and decrease the net load to the grid and therefore kind of optimize the use of the grid itself. That's where things are going. But it's a stepwise process that takes a little time, as David said.
And Commissioner, for full disclosure, we haven't really tackled the rooftop residential market. We're still doing net metering. Most of what I'm talking about, and I should have mentioned this earlier, are the larger community solar distributed energy resources, usually like a 750 kilowatts and above. So we have a mass market rate proceeding going on that got kicked down the road to 2022. So we should keep in touch because we're trying to figure it out also.
Oh, great. Terrific. Thanks.
And we had an intervention from Norway on this.
Yes, the challenge you mentioned was also a factor that played in when we were changing our tariff regime recently, because when I mentioned we have 70% of the network costs were covered in the volumetric part of the tariff. And when you have behind the meter solar and self-production, you save, of course, a lot of costs, but you can recover the same costs. Your savings doesn't add up to the savings of the network. So part of what we did was to try to reduce the volumetric part to reflect the cost of transportation. So the customer had to pay a fixed price based on their use of the grid, and didn't get as much benefits from the tariffs as they did before.
Okay.
Maybe if I may,
yes,
if I may add to the debate, beside the issues around net metering schemes and tariff design, there's much room for improvement when it comes to how we take into account prosumers' behavior in system development. That's something we're currently working on, at least at European level, when we do this 10-year network development plan. So we do it every 2 years. And now for the very first time, we're going to associate DSOs to that exercise to gain the expertise on how they see investment and dispatch decision at the prosumer level, on what is the charging behavior, when you have electric vehicles at home, and all that will help us to make this system planning more efficient.
Thank you.
The automation piece is really important. I mean, if we could build in low-cost communications so that any signal that is sort of sanctioned, to the FERC, order, and like from the balancing authority or from the regulator or from a different state agency to air quality issues. I mean, we could be sending carbon signals. We could be sending price signals of different forms, grid congestion signals, et cetera, locational and temporal, to devices, and behind the scenes, they could be organizing themselves in ways that the consumer doesn't even notice, at least not much. And so I think we're seeing aggregators actually participating now in the resource adequacy markets and aggregating demand-side resources and bidding those in just like regular supply. And they're delivering. They're over-delivering, actually. And so this stuff works. And I think we're in roughly the same place here. It's really great to see this kind of global movement leveraging these new technologies and making it happen. I think it's the future.
So I think this is a perfect way to move to my next question. Because as Commissioner McAllister mentioned, we have rapidly improving communications technology with the Internet of Things, and we can start to design regulatory and market structures which were previously technologically impossible. But what I found is that a lot of the conversation had strong similarities between Europe and North America. But there is also a very big difference, and that's how location is incorporated into market design. But of course, at the transmission level, locational marginal pricing in North America is regarded as fairly uncontroversial, and it's a standard part of a North American market design. Whereas in Europe, when Austria was split from a German price zone, that was a very, very big event in Europe. And there is an immense social and political resistance against locational pricing in the European context. So I very much wonder that how do the panelists see the importance of bringing locational signals to the distribution level, how price signals can help resolving bottlenecks in the distribution system, and how these smart, localized flexibility markets at the distribution level can interact with a national wholesale market design. So, who would like to come first?
Yeah, I can go first, Laszlo, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I think certainly from a UK perspective, we're heading in that direction. We're going to have more locational pricing without a question. I think the challenge, and probably the thing that no one can answer yet, is how locational. Are you going to go right down to a street level or not? Because there's big questions about fairness when you go right down to a street level. For example, you don't want someone on one street paying double the price of someone on the next street over just because he happens to have a newer cable running down his street with more capacity in it. So I think there's definitely going to be more locational pricing, both for distribution markets and national markets, just because the amount of congestion that we're going to see, particularly in the UK, to solve it in an efficient manner, we need to have more locational pricing. I think the tricky part is how locational it is So how granular it is, and also how temporal it is as well, I think is something that's still unknown. And going back to Andrew's point, you can't actually even do this until you've got all the proper comms and digitalization in place, because the value is just not going to be there. It has to be automated, and it has to be relatively seamless from a user perspective.
Sure. Excellent. So who would like to chip in?
Yeah, maybe, I mean, oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Go ahead, Victor.
Let's hear Victor, and then we move to David.
No, I mean, I agree with what Wanda says, that we, at some point, if we want to have flexibility use where it's the most needed, you need to have like more granular space for price signal. We need also to depassionate maybe this debate between zonal and nodal in Europe. A lot of, it's not really black and white, a lot of middle solutions that we have actually tried to bring in a paper in NSOE. It's called NSOE Vision 2030. I've put the link in the chat, where we push concept like the dispatch hubs, for instance. Flexibility markets are interesting among the solutions, but not the silver bullet. What we try to show in the ASM report is really that you can have different models of integration with the wholesale side of things. From NSOE side, we would like very much the idea of merging congestion management markets between distribution and transmission. You can see examples of that, for instance, in the Netherlands, where this GoPax project, common platform, where TSOs and DSOs basically align on what they need from the market. This signal is sent to the trading platform that is connected to the intraday. And then if you have except to have a locational tag on your bids on the intraday, you can maybe also participate in that congestion management market. So that's kind of innovation we think are promising, but would not be the only solutions to address the rising need for congestion. And we agree, yeah, there might be like some more fundamental market design changes needed.
Exactly. We have a big red time is up as flagged from the hosts, but I still give the floor to David, and then we wrap up.
Okay, I'll be really quick. A lesson learned in New York that we had was there's a cause and effect to a temporal or locational pricing. An example there is our capacity market is really designed around 1 hour of the year. And if that is the price signal for the capacity market, it doesn't work with an intermittent resource. So what we said is perfect is the enemy of good, good enough is better than perfect. So we were much more blunt and broad in saying, let's not try to perfect this. Let's just say 240 summer hours are more valuable than the rest of the hours of the year, and gave a certain increase in that. So perfection and exact measures do not work for the technologies. And sometimes you have to figure out what price signals, both temporally and locational wise, are going to be the most beneficial to get resources in the market to participate.
Thank you very much. And perfectly in time for our wrap up, we have these results of the survey. And as you can see, outdated retail tariff design and misplaced incentives in cost recovery, which are primarily regulatory issues, that received a 2/3 vote as the most important barrier in scaling up distributed energy resources. Implementation of cost of IT and enabling infrastructure is a significant vote, but I'm optimistic on that. I think Moore's law will take care of that, and the cost of the Internet of Things will decline. Lack of awareness and information for end consumers, now that I don't think that will ever change. I think any distributed flexibility model which assumes that I will stand up 10 o'clock in the evening, go out to my garage and switch on the charging of my car manually is going to fail miserably. Because as a consumer, I'm lazy and I just don't care. So I think we are going to have systems which are automatic and which can bypass the laziness of the consumers. And this is why very smooth, very digital systems they play an important role. We have emphasized in the IEA's work on smart energy systems that innovation in regulation and innovation in market design is as important as hard technological innovation. And I think the the survey very much reinforced this, but also the conversation convinced me that we are not starting from ground zero. There is a lot of innovation already ongoing, including by the regulators and organizations around the table. This is definitely an unfinished journey, but I thank you very much for your very enlightening comments, and thank you very much for joining us today. And with that, I would wrap up the section and wish a good night and good day for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good to see everyone.
Thank you very much, Laszlo. Thank you to all of our panelists. That was a great session, great speakers, and a great discussion. I really appreciated that everyone was using the chat. There's a quick announcement, public service announcement about tomorrow. Kathy, can you move to the next slide? Just as a reminder, we've got another great panel tomorrow, same time as this one in your same time zones. We'll be following up on some of the same discussions we had today. It will be about the intersection of reliability and distributed resources. So we heard a little bit about that today. There's some conversation about Australia. There was some conversation about the blackouts in California. So I expect we'll be getting into that more tomorrow. I know we do have somebody from Australia joining us tomorrow. And then finally, we will leave the chat open for a couple of minutes. And I would encourage the speakers, if they are available, to stay on for a couple of minutes and answer any other questions that come in through the chat. We will now end the recording, and this will officially end this session. And I hope to see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much.